Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Pegi Robinson. Today's guest is Michelle Nehme, and she's going to tell us about her near-death experience. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Peggy. Thank you so much for inviting me to share my story.
Thank you for coming, and I'm going to let you just take the floor and start wherever you like and take as long as you like.
Sure, thank you. Um, okay, so when I was 19, I was commercially sexually exploited for about 6 months of my life. And as you can imagine, it was a very, very dark time for me. It was uh, a somewhat unique situation. I was a college student. I had been sexually assaulted and I had spoken out about it, and it just downward spiraled to a situation where I was being bullied. My life was being threatened because my case was really public. It just was unfortunately, and I think it's that way for probably a lot of women that speak up, or people that speak up. It just was very, very difficult very quickly. And I ended up homeless for a while, and that's when I was commercially sexually exploited. And it was, like I said, probably about 6 months, and grew to a point where I was being demonically tormented. So these dark beings would follow me around. They would tell me ways I could end my life, and that was the only way I was going to escape what was going on, what was happening. And so I one day decided that was it. I was going to do it. I was going to commit suicide. And I took a bunch of pills. I laid down to die. And when that happened, ooh, it was like an abyss opened up in front of me. So I looked into the best way I can describe it is it was like a void, less than nothing, darker than black. It was like living, but it was like the opposite of living. I don't know how to describe it other than that. But it felt like it was going to consume me, and I just knew that I didn't belong there. So I I grew up a believer. I grew up going to church and very much believed in Jesus, believed in God. When I went through this experience at 19, I didn't know what to believe about God anymore. I mean, it turned my life upside down, as you can imagine, that level of abuse and trauma. I had complex PTSD, night terrors. I was like physically shaking all the time, like I think it's called neurogenic tremors, just from what I was walking through. And I believe that God had either died or gone on vacation, for a couple of weeks, or was like, what had happened there, right? So at that point, my faith was turned upside down because I was like, I don't, how could God let this happen, And I think just being again buried under so much trauma, so much pain. Um, so when I had my near-death experience at 19 from that attempted suicide, um, I mean, it was it was an attempt to escape my pain. It was the only way I felt like I could get out. But then looking into that abyss, it's just like I knew, Peggy, that I did not belong there, that was not the place that I wanted to go. And I remember exactly what I said, just really clumsily, not perfect words, but I just said, Jesus, if you save me, I will find a way to get help. And he saved my life. So I probably should have been brain damaged at the very least. None of that. I woke up the next morning in my bed. I was very confused. My roommate had called the campus police and the nurse because she kind of figured out what had happened, but she had no idea what state I was in. And um, so that was kind of like probably like the big point in my life where I think my faith had been really, really shaken. And like I said, I was a ghost of a person. I did not know up from down. I think everything I felt like I'd been taught had just kind of thrown out the window. But God saved my life. And so um, what's interesting now is like, as I have worked through my story with Jesus, as I looked back, I don't believe that had I died, I would have gone to hell. I saw hell. I looked into it. I saw an abyss. Um, but I don't believe it's like I had not rejected God. I belonged to him. I just was very, very lost in my pain. And I felt like I feel like God showed me for a reason. And there's more to my story that I'll tell around that. Um, so that was 19. It was kind of like a wake-up call. I ended up going home and living with my parents for a while, and then transferring and going to a different college. But Peggy, I ran from God still. I struggled for about 10 years after that. So even though I said, save me, Jesus, if you save me, I'll find a way to get help. I had no idea how to help myself. And that's what I tried to do. I mean, it was like self-help groups. I tried different churches. I tried different addictions. I mean, it was like here, I was there, in and out of bad relationships, drink a lot. Again, just like trying to bury that pain or subdue that pain that was in my heart. And nothing worked, as you can imagine.
We keep
And
thinking that will
it
just
was
go
just
away if we don't
I
deal with
know,
it.
but right, or that somehow you can bury that, right? That somehow it's like, or I could reinvent myself, and then it would just, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it seems like we try to bury it, we're actually planting it because it's going to sprout back up.
That's right.
And we
That's
have to
right.
let it sprout and
Right.
embrace it.
Mhm.
That's all we can do, right?
That's totally right. And I think so much of my identity was built on that pain. Like I was so young, right? And I think a lot of my identity and what I thought about myself was built on that pain. I believed that I'd been created to be a plaything for men. I mean, that was a true belief that I would never have children, that I could never know true love. That wasn't what I had been created for. So like literally like those deep personal beliefs about myself.
And TV and movies reinforce that.
Yeah, for sure. You're so right. And you're so right. And even like the ways that I think women that have been through a lot of abuse are portrayed on TV, and their behavior. Um, I mean, sometimes it's glorified, or it's like, it's the way that women can be over sexualized, I think. So yeah. And even like turning to the Bible, it's like I didn't find a lot on rape in the Bible, or, exploitation or anything like that. It was again, I just was kind of like seeing through my trauma. I was like wearing trauma glasses and
Yeah.
trying to understand
Yeah.
God.
It's like all we get from the Bible is forgive. Turn the
Yeah.
other cheek.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we get that from society too. If we would just stop talking about it, if we would just stop thinking about it, like it would
I
just go
know.
away. Like,
Right.
what's wrong with us that we can't
Right.
move on?
Totally. And then like there were times where I would try to visit churches, and a lot of it was like, I'd share parts of my story. And it was like, how can we fix you? Right? How can we change your behavior, instead of going to the source of the pain, instead of helping
Mhm.
me truly understand that Jesus, that the gospel is a gospel of power, that Jesus is the great healer. And instead it was like, let's work on your behavior. What are you wearing? How are you acting? And that behavior modification, it just wouldn't stick. It didn't work.
And it's like it wasn't our behavior need to change, it was theirs. Their
Yeah.
behavior towards us.
Yeah.
Listen, hold my hand, hug me, let me cry, let me tell it a million times
Man,
until
Peg,
I can process it.
totally. Yeah. And I would say for me, it wasn't until Oh, okay. I lost you for a minute.
Yeah, that's okay. It happens.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
So that was like 19 to 29. Like I said, I was kind of running into anything that I feel like could fix me, could save me, could alleviate my broken heart. And like probably towards the end of my 20s, um, I had a dream, and God would speak to me through dreams. And so I knew he was speaking to me, but again, it just was so hard to it's hard to be in connection with someone, in relationship with someone you believe a lot of lies about, right? Or if you believe a lot of lies about yourself. It was a very difficult relationship. And so but one night God gave me a dream, and in the dream I walked into a men's club, what people call a strip club, and just started ministering to the women that worked there. And I remember waking up from that dream and laughing, and I was just like, are you serious, God? Like, I'm going to walk into a men's club and just be like, hey, you want to join a Bible study? Like, it did not make sense to me at all. And so I just kind of tucked it away. It was like, that just isn't realistic. And then it was probably a few years later that I found a group called the Magdalene Project, run by this amazing woman, Robbie Sluter. And what they did is they went into men's clubs and they would take gifts to the women working there and the employees working there, and they would get the permission of the owners, so they knew why we were. And we would just ask the women if they needed prayer, if they needed like just help. A lot of them are single moms, a lot of them have kids. And it just kind of blew my mind. I was like, there's people that actually do this. And the woman that ran it, Robbie, she was unlike anyone I'd ever met. I'm sorry, I don't know where I
I
lost
think it,
you.
I'm sorry. I think it's, my internet must be messing up. I'm sure it's on my end. You were talking about the woman, Robbie. Um,
Mhm. She just became a role model for me. I think the way she lived her life, it was this kind of unconditional love. She wasn't, you know, working from a church. Was out in the city where people needed to hear about Jesus, where people needed love, where people needed help. And she had gathered women from all over the city. And so it was the first time I'd ever been involved in something like that. And I love to tell the story of the first club that we went into. There was probably like four of us that went in, and we went straight in to the dressing room. And one of the first women working there I met, she we got into a conversation, and she was telling me about she had three children, ages like 6 months, 3 years, and 6 years old. And we started talking, and I was like, we're just here from around the city to see if you need any help. And it was just so precious, Peggy. Like, I could tell no one had ever asked her that before. Like, did you just need like things for your children, any like support outside of your work? She ended up quitting the next day, and I went to visit her in the apartment that she lived in. And the first thing she asked me, she's like, where did you get the shoes that you?
okay, it left off of you were starting to tell. I think did she say where did you get your shoes or what did she say?
She said, yes, she was like, where did you get your shoes? And she started to describe them. She was like, they had the word Jesus written in diamonds on them.
Oh.
And I was like, my shoes didn't have anything written on them, like no diamonds or anything, but that's how she'd seen
Oh
my shoes
my.
that night. Yeah.
That's
And she
awesome.
felt like it was a sign for her to leave, to quit her job, which she'd wanted to do for a long time. And so I spent about a year getting to know her, would drive her and her children to church on Sundays. And it was just like, I think just, I feel like she ministered to me more than I did to her. Just her story, she had fallen in love with Jesus. She had a really hard story. Her mom, was a drug addict. Her dad was in prison, and she'd been dancing since she was 19 for almost 10 years. But I think a lot of the elements of her story, again, it just helped being a part of this ministry. All of these things helped me start to put words to my story and start to see Jesus moving again in a way that I'd never seen him move inside a church building. Not that he doesn't do that. It just the joy of Jesus to be with people where they are, wherever they are, no matter what they're doing, what's going on. And his love for them, like the way he loved this young woman, it really shook me, Peggy. I think seeing that, because I couldn't, in a way, receive God's love for myself, but seeing him lavish his love upon her, who many might call undeserving, and not because she did anything, she just said yes to him. It was so beautiful.
Can you
Um,
imagine a reality show of this? Like walking in and connect with these women and
I actually love that idea because there's so many untold stories, and it's so hard. I mean, that industry, the women working in that industry are marginalized. It's very hard for them to, they're working certain hours. It's hard for them to connect to the outside world. And I think, again, they have a certain identity of themselves. The world treats them a certain way. And when we have that misunderstanding of who we are, we live from that place. We live from what we believe our identity is. And that work is hard work. It's dangerous work. It's very destructive for them. So that's what a lot of them would share with me. I would even say that is like the stories they gave me. Um, so, Jesus is so patient with us, even with that part of my journey. I still struggled. To fully give my life over to him. I struggled with my pain, and it wasn't till I turned 29. I had an unexpected pregnancy, and that was really my coming to Jesus moment. It was like I knew that I couldn't do it by myself. I was like, God, I keep trying to fix my life, and this is something I can't fix. And I was very scared. There was a lot of pressure to have an abortion. There's a lot of pressure for women, unmarried women, to abort. And God kept me. Praise him, Peggy. He kept me. He would give me visions of who this person might be, of the worth of their life. I felt like I could see the worth of this child's life, even though I couldn't see the worth of my own life. And I told God, I said, okay, God, I have been trying to do it my own way for 10 years. I will give you the next 10 years. And it's so funny. I mean, right, like that again, my mind, I could understand it. I'm like, okay, I've done it my way for 10 years. I'll give you 10 years. Like he's probably was laughing at me at that point. Like, really? You think it's only going to be 10 years? But I said, okay, whatever you ask of me, I will do it. I will do it. And thus started, I think, my love story with Jesus Christ, my love story with him. And I really started healing, gave birth to my daughter. There was so much in that embodiment of her that helped me understand who Jesus was, who God was, how he parented, began to understand that God had not been asleep, that he had not abandoned me. And really, it was difficult. I was a single mom. I had complex PTSD, and you know, I mean, you probably understand that. Like with
Yeah.
PTSD, it's like even just the most basic daily tasks are so difficult. Um, and again, I didn't understand all that. I just felt like I was struggling to get it together, like get it together, Michelle. But it was so hard. Like even just grocery shopping,
This morning I
the
was doing dishes and I had Little House on the Prairie on, and all of a sudden I'm having a flashback because something on
yeah,
there triggered me. And I started telling my husband, oh, this reminds me of this and this and this.
yeah,
Hit one of
that's
those
exactly,
topics.
yes, that's right. That's right. Um, so between that and then like trying to work, I would work uh a lot of times during the evenings after I'd put my daughter to bed. And so I wouldn't sleep very much. So it was rough. And then she was chronically ill when she was a child. She had pretty bad asthma, and there were nights like I would stay up listening to her breathing. I didn't know if we were going to end up in the ER again. I mean, just things like that. So it was hard, but Jesus was so faithful. I mean, there were times he would like people would show up at my front door with a meal. Um, you know, people, I mean, a lot of times my bank account was in the negative. Like I just, it was again, just like all these things would pile up and just feel like, I feel like I was being crushed under the weight of my circumstances. And then God would send someone to help. He would send someone to help. There was a time like I had my car broke down and it was sitting in front of my house, and it was a really old Honda Accord. And one day I could hear this like ice cream truck coming, like the music of an ice cream truck. And I was like, there's never an ice cream truck in our neighborhood. I was like, that's so strange. And it kept coming closer and closer. And he stopped in front of my house, and he left his music on and came to the front door. And he's like, can I buy this car from you? And I was like, it doesn't run. And he's like, it doesn't matter. I'll bring you cash today. I mean, just stuff like that where God was like, I'm with you. I'm with you. There was one summer that was exceptionally difficult. The car I had, I live in Texas. It's like 100 and it can be up to 110 in the summer. I mean, it gets so hot here. My AC had died. Um, we think my finances again were in the negative. It was such a hard summer, and I got this stomach pain that was so bad I couldn't walk. I was literally bedridden. And this is probably when Cora was about 4. My daughter was about 4. And I just thought, I'm gonna die in this place, Lord. Like I can't do this. This is too hard for me. So I'm laying in bed, just thinking through these things one day, and I had a vision. And in my vision, I'm in the desert. I have this little straw, like you think of a cocktail straw, like the smallest straw possible. And I'm walking around the desert and I'm trying to stick it in the sand. And I'm like, if I can just get it deep enough, if I can just find the right place to put it in, I'll find water. Like if I can just, where is it? Where is it? If I can dig deep enough, I'll get to water. And I'm working to try to do this. Jesus shows up, and he suddenly shows up next to me, and he holds out his hand. He says, Michelle, give me the straw. And I said, no way, Jesus. This literally is my last straw. Like this is the last thing, right? And it makes it so funny. I'm like, no way. I will die if I give you this. And he held out his hand. He said, Michelle, you can trust me. Give it to me. And I looked at his hand and I could see the scars from the cross on his hand. And it hit me. It was like he gave up everything for us, everything. The Bible says he didn't consider equality with God to be grasped, but he humbled himself to the point of death on a cross. He gave up everything. And I was like, okay, I can give him this. And I handed him my straw. And it was like something shifted deeply in me at that point. It's not like my circumstances changed right away, but um, the nights that Cora was sick or that were really hard, I would sit up and I would practice listening to God's voice. I would practice listening for him. I would meditate on scripture. I would practice gratitude. Like every time he would send someone to help me, or like, my mom showed up one day with like a set of pots for me, and she's like, I felt like you needed these. I wasn't great at asking for help. I have to be honest. I was not. I think there was a lot of like victim mentality, scarcity mentality. It was very stuck. But then God was bringing me out of that. It was like I just practiced gratitude for the little things. Like, thank you for the pots you brought me today, Lord. Thank you for the food my friend gave me. Thank you, the little things. And that gratitude really became like, it felt like the sun rising in my life, where I could start to see things I hadn't seen before. I could see that there was joy for me. I could see that God would strengthen me in those moments that felt like I can't get through this. Like I'm having another anxiety attack or another a memory resurface. It was like God was like, "Hey, I've got this with you. I am carrying this. Just stay in me. Stay with me. Let me love you through this. Let me show you the depths of my love." And it was profound, Peggy. It was profound. Like those years where it felt like I was moving it only an inch forward at a time, just like barely moving, but just the richness of what God was creating in my heart. So it was about when Cora was 5. I was just praying one day. I think I'm probably talking to him about something insignificant, nothing in particular. And Jesus showed up again and he said, I want to show you something. And he took my hand and we were suddenly like flying through space. So passing like galaxies, I could see like these clusters of stars. It was so beautiful. It was so warm. I feel like his presence just filled outer space and we were flying. And then he set me down in a city and I had no idea what was happening. Like my first thought wasn't like, oh, is this heaven? I just literally was like in awe of Jesus, but like instantly, I knew it was a holy place. It was like I felt like everything was breathing. The walls were breathing. The ground below me was like clear, but also almost like this golden stone, all these different colors of stone. Um, there was there wasn't any sun, but the place was like bright, but it was like almost like that, like when the sun is rising or setting, that sort of sky where it's that gentle light. Um, and sure enough, I mean, it was in heaven, and Jesus, he spoke with me, he took me around, he showed me things. He would take me to rooms and it's like there was like buildings, but it's not buildings the way that I think of here. It was almost like everything was sewn into the fabric of heaven. Holy Spirit's a part of everything. I mean, it's just, it, so much grander. Everything seemed to be alive. That's, I think, how I would describe it. And he would take me into these beautiful rooms with these ornate doors that had this like writing, like secrets of the Holy Spirit written on them, and show me things and tell me about my identity and my life in ways that I mean, I never could have dreamt up on earth. He he would, I felt like we could communicate without even talking, and he would like share ideas with me. It was almost like the atmosphere was like rife with potential, and all you had to do was think it and it would be. And everything, like the plants seemed to like breathe, everything seemed to have its own song, all these songs filling the air, but they didn't clash. They were all like in harmony. But I think what was most profound to me was just the intensity of the love of Jesus Christ, like feeling that perfect, indescribable love, unfaltering, unwavering, unbreakable love. And just resting in that. I mean, I feel like we would just rest for hours, like in fields of wildflowers, and he would set up a picnic and we would just talk and just rest in his love. The flowers, oh my gosh, the gardens, like some of them were more ordered and some of them were more wild, but they still had this order to them, but they would go on for miles and miles. And it just felt like there was like everything had its own story. It's like you could spend eternity just on like in one garden, understanding the story of that garden. I mean, it just and the unfathomable, like um the fulfilled potential, I think. Um and all of it like to glorify God. All of it to glorify God. Um so there was like it was probably for like a period of 6 months, maybe a little more, maybe a year, but he would come back and he would take me, Peggy, and he would take me into heaven and I would see something different every time. He he would sometimes we would just play together. Like there was like this time we went to this room and there was all this spray paint. We were just like spray painting things. I mean, literally like things you would think like this happens in heaven. There was a time we went to the throne room and it felt like when he brought me in, we were in this like parade and the people were just like drunk on the love of Jesus, like that, like hilariously drunk, so full of the love of Jesus. Not even just that there was no wrong, it was like everything right was there too, everything completed in Christ that was meant to be completed. It just and and it was part of this parade and we went on this parade up this embankment and I remember stepping out and seeing what was like the sea of glass. It must have been the sea of glass, but it seemed like a big mirror on the ground. And it just reflected the glory of God, this like the way the light shone off of it. It went as far as I could see off this way. And then the throne of God, and these other thrones surrounding it. And just the worship, oh my gosh, like the worship of the people and the way it was like would go almost like in waves to the throne and back, this like crashing worship. Um, and then the tree of life, like Jesus, he would tell me where to look, he would show me things, he pointed me to this tree that was like massive. I mean, it was like bigger than the trees of our earth, and it was like as if many, many trees made up this one tree. And it had what I saw was like almost like a red fruit on it, like a red gem or jewel. And it just was beautiful. So, and then the other thing he showed me was the children in heaven. So babies, children, like hundreds and thousands of them. And he actually came up, he had this like a big white robe on and he opened it up and all of these babies were swaddled and tucked into his robe. Like, and he said, "Do you know who I love, Michelle?" And I was like, "Who do you love, Jesus?" And he said, "I love the babies."
Oh,
And it was just so sweet, Peggy, just each one cared for. And then I saw this like procession of angels and they're holding children's hands and the children's their faces are full of delight and they're playing. They're they're just they're having fun. I mean, it was amazing. And I remember looking back at Jesus and he said, tell the parents who have lost children, that they won't have missed a thing. They won't have missed a thing. And I looked at him and it was like, in him, in his eyes, it was like all these memories of like birthdays or celebrations or like first time walking or high school graduation, like all these moments that parents who have lost, it was like they still were there and they were still available. I don't understand it fully. It's just that he will make it right and he will make it complete. Um, and some of these babies, it was like I knew they'd been lost, through abortion. I knew they had been lost through miscarriage. I mean, in any way conceivable. But it was like God was like, Jesus was like, I have the last word, and I love the babies. So so precious. Um, and there's more I could share in that vein, but I would say that that it was like it really healed me in a way I didn't think was possible on this earth. It was like God restoring to me my identity through his perfect world, his perfect universe, like his perfect creation of heaven. And I'm so grateful for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was a blessing and a half.
Yeah, it was. It was. And so, and I think like things just like when I felt like I couldn't love Jesus anymore, he would do something and I would love him more. And it's like, how is that possible? How is it possible for a heart to love in such a way? But again, I think that is the gift of Jesus Christ to us. So, um, so I made it to my 10 years. I made it to my 10 years of like, God, you can have all of me. I'm going to do it your way. Um, and of course, I was like fully committed at that time. I felt like, Peggy, I had been walking out the greatest love story ever told. I'm like, why is this love story not in books? And then I found Song of Solomon and I was like, oh, it isn't a book. And in Revelation and other parts of the Bible that I really enjoy reading and just like, oh, that love story is here. People misinterpret the Bible. They use it for their own purposes.
Mhm.
But Jesus wants us to know we are radically loved, you know.
Yes.
So, okay, so year 11, something miraculous happened for me. And I had just started going to a new church that I had been really hungry. I felt like God had led me to like really seek him out for the miracles of God. So the gifts of the Holy Spirit. So things like speaking in tongues, healing, prophecy, things like that. But to understand it in the right context, because I think those things have been unfortunately very misused in a lot of ways. But really like understand God's heart for these things. And I started a church that is still my home church. It's been beautiful and is really like, I think just love their stance on things and really, again, just the way they approach it and the humility they have. And one night, an evangelist came to speak. I've been there about a year, and an evangelist came to speak, and God was still healing me of some of my hurts from the past of religion. And I was like, evangelist, like, do I really want to I want to hear an evangelist speak. Just being fully honest. And but he came, this guy named Richie Seltzer, and he shared his story. He'd been like in prison like 10 times before the age of, I don't know, like in his early 20s or something. I mean, just crazy, crazy story. And he's sharing, and his words are like really moving me. And the whole time this happened, this painting, this rose behind me is being painted by one of our art team. And so when I was right after I had been sexually exploited, um, kind of after all that had ended and I was like still in that really dark place, I was sharing with a friend about my story, and she drew this rose, and the rose was a bud and it was closed. And I went and I had it tattooed on my body because I felt like that was my identity. That was my story, the rose that never got a chance to open. And when this happened, I saw that, and God said, He said to me that night, He said, Michelle, I'm giving you victory over death. And I saw this, and I knew that this was the story Jesus was writing for me, that my story is that I'm a rose in full bloom. I'm not the one, I'm not a bud. I'm not the bud that never got to open. That's not who Jesus is. That's not how He writes our stories. And so I went and told the artist the story, and got this painting, and that was kind of the start of it. But that Jesus had spoken so deeply to me that night, like, I'm giving you victory over death. And I felt like I wanted to hear this evangelist speak again. And so I looked him up on the internet. I found out he was speaking in San Antonio next, which is where most of my trauma had taken place, where a lot of that trauma had taken place. And I knew I was supposed to go. So it was a Randy Clark conference. And what I love about Randy Clark is, again, he's very ecumenical. He's not like, the Baptists are right or the Catholics are right. It's like everyone, he says, every denomination carries a piece of the glory of God. And really, like, we have to learn how to love each other. That is God's vision for us. That's His heart for us. It's through love that we show the world who Jesus is. It's how we reveal Jesus, even to our own hearts, our own communities. And um, so it was great. It was great. It was there was a lot of healing taking place. And on day 3, God said, Michelle, go ask Richie to pray for you again. And I went forward and I prayed, and I felt fire in my body. All the way from my stomach, it went up, and my jaw cracked open, and my arm, I could feel it in my left arm, which is, I had a lot of trauma on the left side of my body. And I knew God was healing me. He was healing me of, I didn't know what yet, but I knew He was healing me in this miraculous way. And then Jesus said, we're not done yet. And He said, we're going to go back to the places where you experienced trauma in the city. I had a friend with me, and we drove back to places where I had experienced trauma, and God spoke words over me, every single one of them. It's like He gave me victory in all of those places. And then He took me back to my dorm room where I had tried to commit suicide. And we went into the parking lot, and I'm literally standing in front of the storm. I can see, I was sitting on a balcony when that had happened, and I could see the balcony. And Jesus said, scream at the dorm. And I was like, people are going to think I'm drunk, Lord. And He goes, is that really what you're worried about? Like, just like we're in the middle of something pretty big here. He said, just yell at the dorm. And I'm like, what am I going to yell? And then the word love erupts out of my mouth as loud as I can. I scream love. And then it's like I feel like I was possessed by Holy Spirit in that morning. In that moment, I was dancing in the street, dancing in that parking lot, screaming, I won, I won, I won. Literally God's words. I don't feel like those were my words at all. It was just Jesus celebrating, God celebrating. I won in the place where, I should have died. I would have died. I thought I was going to die. And I'm yelling, I'm screaming, I won, I won, I won. I'm dancing wildly. All these students come out onto their balconies, and one of them at the very top, he's like, what did you win? He's like, congratulations. So, and then God's like, okay, we're not done yet. So he took me to a couple other places, and then we finally ended up on the steps of this building where so I had this moment. I had been really badly bullied, and it's the moment I had decided I was going to take my life. And it was that space, that same place. He took me, and we were sitting on the steps, and I suddenly felt like I was sitting in this river. And Jesus said, ask me what the river's made out of? And I said, okay, Lord, what is the river made out of? And he said, it's the tears anyone has ever cried over being abused. And he said, I am crediting to your healing the tears anyone has ever cried over being abused. Those were his exact words. And Peggy, in a heartbeat, I knew what he meant. That he wasn't just like giving me my redemption for my story. Like, here, I'm the God of redemption. Here's your slice of the redemption pie for what you've been through. He was like, I'm the God of redemption. I hold redemption for all humankind, and I give you all of me. Just like that moment in the desert when I had that straw, when I was like, he gave all for us. Like he was saying that again. I give all to you, all of myself to you. So I give you all redemption for all mankind. And it was like a mind-blowing moment, right? Like, what does that mean, Lord? Like, that's so much bigger than anything I could have like imagined about you.
Mhm.
And it felt like in that moment, these like scissors from heaven came down and cut my suffering. Like I had this string of suffering and it cut it and it was gone. And a couple months later, he gave me a verse. I want to read it. So, and it really is like backs up what he said to me. It's Revelation 7. It's Revelation 7:17, and he says, this is the Passion Translation version, which has been really helpful for me in my journey, that Brian Simmons specific translation, because he goes back to the Aramaic that Jesus would have spoken, and he does the Hebrew and the Greek, and he gives you cultural like context too. But he says that for the Lamb at the center of the throne continuously shepherds them unto life. He's talking about eternity, guiding them to the everlasting fountains of the water of life, and God will wipe from their eyes every last tear. Now, this isn't a verse that is like we know this verse, God will wipe away every last tear, right? So Brian Simmons, he says that the word wipe in Greek actually means anoint, and that verse can actually be translated, God will anoint them in their tears. And even like not like a will in the future, but that it's like happening now and it's happening continuously, that God anoints us in our tears. And it was just such a huge moment for me to read that verse and say, that is what he did for me in that place back on that campus where I should have died at the very least, like with what I had gone through with and that even though I lived everything I left believing about myself, I could never have joy in my life or be happy or have like a full and happy life. Like, that again, that I had been created for the pleasures of men and that was it. That I literally had been created for that. And Jesus was like, no, not only is that not true, but every tear you have cried from abuse, I anoint you in those tears. And that is why I share. That's why I share my story.
It
That
makes me
hope.
feel like our tears holy water, you know,
Yeah,
is that God showing us compassion through her, makes you think.
right. When you think about like again, another verse, people talk about like the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept, right? When Lazarus died, even knowing that Lazarus would be raised from the dead, even knowing what was about to happen, he still wept, he still cried. And I think there's something profound about that, that there's room for our grief, and that's part of our process.
Was your perpetrator like a coach or something? I'm just wondering why it was so public and why you were bullied.
Yeah, no, it was another student,
Okay.
but there was there was a lot to the scenario because I had a boyfriend at the time and he was an athlete, and so when he like
Oh,
there was just a lot that went on. where where he had tried to beat up the guy, and then like there were charges that were being pressed, and so it became like a public case.
Okay.
Um, and I was on a small campus where a lot of gossip, you know. So it didn't take long for my story to get around, but it created such a untenable atmosphere. I mean, it created a very, very difficult atmosphere for me. So,
Okay. I can tell that it is still fresh for you.
mm,
Um, that the difficulty in talking about it and focus. I love that you focus on the miraculous
yeah.
healing and the dreams, the visions you were given, and because that's where our focus ultimately, you know, where it lies, it feels good
Mhm.
because the memories and stuff is not where it feels good to live. How old is your daughter now?
She's 15 now. Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, yeah, in some ways, yes, I feel like I had not been released to share parts of my story until recently. So I'm still learning how to share. I think that's part of it. Um, the initial like sexual assault though, and I feel like you've talked about this, Peggy, within your own story. Um, Jesus took me back to that night and he showed me where he was. And he was inside of me and he showed me like I was lit up like a bright light. And even though it didn't erase that took place, it changed that memory for me. Like that memory doesn't trigger me. It doesn't hold weight
Yeah.
because it's like um that Jesus, he breathed inside of that memory and changed it. Which is like, it's kind of a mystery, right? Like how that could be. But again, I think his redemption, there's nothing it can't touch.
Yeah, I identify with your story so much because at 18, I was on a hill and I just
Mm,
started praying, God, I need help. I'm not going to have help. I'm going to turn 18 soon. I'm going to be on my own. I'm going to be kicked out. What am I going to do? And I was given these steps. You need to get your driver's license. You need to get a job. You need to get over this ex-boyfriend and da da da. And
mm,
so first thing I did was call the ex-boyfriend because that's the only way I was going to get over him was have some, resolution over this. So, and then, I got my driver's license, I got the job, and when I got kicked out at 18, I paid $300 for a car, and that was my home. I was the happiest homeless person there ever was. And then until I was able to rent a place, which actually my parents moved out of the house, and I went to the landlord and I was like, "Can I rent this?" He said,
mm,
"Sure." And it was only $300 a month. So, um, yeah, we're given and then too, I identify with your story because, um, when my husband of 16 years asked for a divorce, my first husband, he left. And I was also the type that I never asked for anything. I never asked for help. I'll do everything on my own. And nobody was ever around to help me. So that wasn't in my DNA to go. And so he took the kids. I was take the kids for the first visit. Now it's like asking for the divorce didn't hurt me. He couldn't see it. So I'm going to take the boys to the first visit. Thought maybe that hurt me. Then they left. And so I'm sitting there in the bathroom sobbing and why God, my family hated me and then I heard in front of the mirror, I heard where it was coming from, like a physical place. I heard my child.
mm.
And just that is all it took. I was dancing and singing around the house like you were celebrating, when like that's right, that's the only family I need. And then my ex calls and says there's a party going on down at the riverbank. You want to go? So he come pick me up. We went down there and he thought he was going to be able to get me in the boat. And he had tried to harm me before in that boat. And I knew if I got in that boat, I would never be seen again. But because I heard my child earlier that day, I was like, nope. And I danced for hours. Like there's a whole bunch of people on this riverbank, and I
Right.
ignored them all. I just listened to the music and I was barefoot and I danced for hours. And it took weeks to get that black out of my bottom of my feet, where I was like, oh, this Indian, like you see the Indian dances where they just go and go. That's like what I was just dancing because in my
Yeah.
mind, I'm celebrating. God said, my child. And I was just celebrating. And that was my victory. I was healed of my trying to make this man happy,
Wow.
needing his approval. That was gone. I had
Wow.
God. So I know I identify with your story so much.
Oh, I love that. I love that it's like that it is an all-out celebration in those moments, right? It's not like it's nothing small. It's not like a kind of it is like, no, we are celebrating to the max around this victory. And I think heaven is celebrating with us. I mean, that's awesome, Peggy.
And that picture of that rose behind you, I mean, because the name of my book's The Will of a Wildflower, because after
Right,
my 5-year-old drowning, I had the experience. And in
right.
that experience, I was told that someday I would dance in the wind too and celebrate my victory. Of course, I didn't think of this as I'm dancing, that night when he asked for a divorce. But years later, when I started remembering the drowning and putting the pieces of the puzzle together, I'm like, that's what I was doing. I was celebrating my victory. I made it. And that's what all I could think was that night is like, I survived. And that's
Yeah.
all this celebration was about was I survived. I'm still here. None of that killed me. None of that got me to that ledge because at 16, I had walked in front of a semi. I was like done. And my friend was on the phone and trying to get hold of my ex-boyfriend that I was mooning over at that time. And I just thought it's useless. And I walked, it was at night and there's semi lights coming. And I thought, hurry up, hurry up. And all of a sudden she yanked me. Now, I don't know how she yanked me so fast. I mean, it was laying on the semi was laying on the horn. I always think of that when I go to that intersection. And I remember that happened. And, we all have those moments where we're at that suicidal point.
Yeah.
And but when we get to that point, we're celebrating our victories. Like we made it. Like all this stuff happened, this happened, and we're still standing.
Yeah.
It could be cause for depression, and at times it is, but also it's a cause for celebration because we made it.
Yeah.
And I love the picture. I can visualize you standing there, I won.
I know, like I won. It makes me think of so when I was pregnant, the first verse God gave me was Hosea 2, and it's a story about kind of like the wild woman, and then Jesus, God's like, I'm going to lead you into the desert, and I'm going to strip you of all your lovers. So it's like only her and him. So it's like she's stripped down to it's only her and him, and then he says, and I will speak tenderly to you there. And the valley of Angkor becomes the door of hope. The valley of despair becomes the door of hope. It literally becomes the door of hope. And then he says, no longer will you call me master, you will call me husband. And that was the promise he gave me at the beginning of that 10 years when I was like, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have special words or special prayers or anything. It just, but, and like you're saying, so much of my understanding of my story is like looking back and walking through it with Jesus and helping me understand and put words to it. Cause like, then it was just like, what's the next day? What's the next day? But that he was speaking tenderly to me and making my valley of darkness, my valley of despair, became a door of hope so that he could become my husband, so that I could be considered, his bride. I could become so I could enter the love story. I could enter the love story, you know.
And so tell people what you're doing now. I mean, I've seen you're Emmy award-winning like filmmaker and
Oh,
you've done
yeah.
all these things.
So I do. I'm a filmmaker, and that has also been such a journey with God, even just like times of laying that down, because I think there was, I spent years working on a documentary about sex trafficking. And a lot of that was like tied up again in my identity. It's like, oh, if I could do something great, if I can accomplish something great, if I can help people, then my life is worth something. And Jesus was like, your life is worth something because I'm madly in love with you, period, end of story. And so like I had to get there with him. Um, but yeah, it's been visuals are my love language. It's how God speaks to me. And then just like seeing things, dreams or visions. And so translating that into film. Um, and then currently I'm working for, as you know, Beloved Gallery, which we are, and you're going to be a guest this fall at our fall affair, which we're so excited to have you and your story and the wisdom that you bring with that. So it's a for those listening, it's a gallery with Akiane Kramarik's Prince of Peace painting that she painted when she was 8, never gone to church, never read a Bible. Her parents were atheist and agnostic. She was homeschooled. She didn't have a TV. And yet, as a child, she saw this face that she said could be a role model for people in the world, that was a face of love, unconditional love, unwavering faith, and eternal life. This is this child who'd never read a Bible. And she painted this enormous portrait of Jesus, and people from around the world come and see this painting and have encounters with Jesus. And it is beautiful how God has chosen to speak through art, how he's chosen to speak through Akiane's art. And we're focusing on stories about heaven. Heaven is real is our theme this year. So
That's
yeah.
awesome.
So yeah, it is an honor to kind of do all that, to be a part of that. Yeah.
And I just got to pinch myself that I'm going to be involved with you and her and the other speakers who I've had, all of them on, except for the priest. I've had all of them speak on my podcast. And so it's going to be amazing time to be in presence of, all these people that have been touched by God's grace, um, and to be involved in this is just amazing.
And I'd be curious, your thoughts, Peggy. It seems like God is revealing heaven and revealing Jesus more than ever now. Uh, you know, you are probably even more of an expert, way more of an expert than I am on that, of just people who have had these experiences, have these stories, and so many of them being brought to the forefront now, and to really glorify Jesus. I mean, to speak the truth about who Jesus is.
And I'm not sure who came up with the phrase, but it keeps coming to mind, for such a time as this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just is so fitting, for such a time as this, that the NDEs, the Christian NDEs, are coming to the forefront, because the NDE community kind of stole them from God, in my opinion. And I
Mm.
felt like I had a little bit of hand, as others did too, but I had a little bit of hand of stealing them back and giving them back to God.
Yeah.
And so for this to be a Christian event that involves Christian NDEs is just amazing.
Mhm. Yeah. I would agree. And I love what you said, stealing them back for God. I mean, the purpose being for people to knowing the truth about God, knowing the truth about Jesus, about heaven, I think is, again, back to that identity piece, is like us knowing the truth about ourselves. And then um, it shapes the way you make choices. It shapes the way you act in this earth, the things you do. And and again, I think just like the satisfaction, there's so much satisfaction. And that's something I love to say, because I think sometimes people are, they're still waiting on their miracle, maybe. And they're like, why am I still waiting on my suddenly, my miraculous? And I would say, having done both, like the day in, day out of walking with Jesus in the really hard places, and there's still some of that, it's like I'm 5 years out. When I had my miraculous healing, I really feel like Jesus healed my brain, and things have finally started making sense, like this past 5 years of my life. I've been able to do more, progress more, begin to share my story in ways, that I didn't really have capacity for before. And there's still really hard days with some of that, and working through pieces of my past or my history. Um, but it's like, it's so worth knowing Jesus in all of it. He's not the suddenly God, and he's not only the like, let me lead you through your suffering, God. Like, he is in all of it. And I think he is the prize, and it's worth knowing him in all of it. And so I just want to encourage people to keep going, keep leaning into him, keep letting him speak tenderly to your heart in the middle of the desert. It is worth it.
And if you're at your last straw, give it to God.
Yeah. Yes. And if you're at your last straw, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like there was a verse God gave me later around that vision with that last straw, and it was like that I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Again, like it was so helpful to read the Passion Translation version of that, because there's, earlier Paul says, because I'm like, Paul, really? How do you go from like we despaired of death, like a couple chapters prior to like I can do all things through him who strengthens me? Because I think we throw that verse around a lot. But Paul says, I know what it's like to be satisfied in hunger or in fullness. I believe that, or I know what it's like to be okay in hunger or being satisfied. But Brian Simmons says, like, that also can be translated, I know what it's like to give up all things. And that was like my last straw moment with God. It was like, if Jesus was willing to give up all things, am I willing to give up all things? Meaning, like, even my last bit of strength, to give him my yes, like, I still belong to you. We're still doing this together, even if I have no idea, what the next step forward is. And but I think it's in that again, that door, then that darkness becomes the door of hope.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to free will because you had your free will and you
That's
turned your back on, you know, all those things. And they're like, okay, I did it my way.
Yep. Yeah.
And we all know people that we're still praying for, waiting for them to stop trying it their way
Yeah.
and give it to God because we just see them making mistake after mistake and misery and going down this hole and they keep thinking, by gosh, I'm going to show the world to do it my way. And I'm thinking of my adopted children when I say that
Mm.
and when they're gonna realize, come to that Jesus moment, come to Jesus moment where, okay, I give in, give it
Yeah.
to God.
And he's so faithful to like to stay with us, to pursue us through all of that. And I know it's well, I love what you're doing now, Peggy, though, because in many ways, like your story, your courage has become a platform for so many stories. Like you uphold so many stories through your story and through your courage. And I fully believe that the power of the testimony, is what saves us. It's what emboldens us to live and to give ourselves over to Jesus again and again. So
Yeah, for such a time as this.
yes, that's right.
Okay.
Uh,
Well, now I will be seeing you again and a couple other ladies. I think you said end of August versus September. We're gonna have video here on NDE TV and talk more about Arkiana. Am I saying her name right?
Akiana.
Akiane,
Yeah.
about her Beloved Gallery event at the end of October in Texas. We'll be talking more about that later.
Yeah.
And I look forward to that. So
Yes, we
I
do.
know you've got to go. You got something you need to do.
Mhm.
And it's been really great. Is there anything else that you didn't get to cover or a last leaving message with us or?
I just would say, um, no, just to encourage, just my encouraging people. And I think just, I always want to encourage anyone who is dealing with an unexpected pregnancy that you can do it. You can do it.
Yeah.
God will give you everything you need, and it will be, again, you will enter that incredible love story. And for those who have lost children, that's that promise of God, um, that you won't have missed a moment. That is literally the exact words he said to me. So I just my prayers, my testimony encourages people. And I would just say thank you so much, Peggy. Thank you for what you do and just for creating such a beautiful and gentle space for people to share their hearts.
Thank you. I was 18 homeless in that car and pregnant 1 month after I graduated high school. But I graduated high school while homeless. But I was working, I had a job, and I did it until I got into that rented house. And, you know, my son is born in 80, so he's 44 now. He's a grandfather, um, 6 kids and a stepdaughter, makes 7. And so, I mean, yeah, that's a life there that
Wow.
will be our greatest reward.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. I mean,
Yeah.
even the worst circumstances, I mean, we can't see the future. We can't imagine how well it's going to work out.
Mm-mm.
All we can do is trust. And sometimes that's hard. And sometimes we just,
Yeah.
and I would walk along the road when I was pregnant and rub my belly. I was pregnant for him before I got married to the father. And I
Mm,
would just, I said, no, we're going to be poor. Yeah, I'd tell him, we're going to be poor. But I
mm.
always promise to love you. You will always have a lot of love. Always promise to love you. And we made it.
Beautiful. It is the greatest gift. That's beautiful.
He has a master's degree. He's a regional manager of OSHA. I'm so proud of him.
Wow.
Yeah. He served in Afghanistan and he's injured and almost lost his leg. But I said, nobody's taking my son's leg. You're not doing it. And so he has he came in third in jiu-jitsu, world championship jiu-jitsu. And I'm just so proud of him.
How old is he now?
44.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that. And then I mean, what you're talking about, like the blessing through seeing him grow, seeing his life and the power and the value of his life. And I feel like similarly with my daughter, it's just been my greatest gift.
And,
So,
you know, even though my husband is his stepdad, I
mm,
mean, he thinks the world of my husband. He was at the hospital last week, you know,
mm,
2, 3 hours sitting there talking to him. And then he brought all the kids and the wife, you know, 2 days later. And then we met with him just the other day and had breakfast and things. And he's
mm,
really stepping up to the plate, you know, being there for us. And oh my gosh, people that would throw that away. Uh, I feel sorry for him.
no,
So.
yeah.
All right. Well, I'll let you do what you got to do, and I'll get this sent out later to you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peggy. I really appreciate you.
Thanks, Michelle.